Hey, what's going on, gathering family, and to all those who might be hanging out with us on Facebook this evening? Um, just wanted to come back at you as we do every 2 weeks, every second and fourth, excuse me, every second and fourth Wednesday of the month is a Bible study for us, and so we that's an important part of what any church should be a part of, and so we want to be faithful to that, and we just believe it's a great way to grow and to dissect and to understand at a greater level, and so that's what we are doing, and so we're really glad to be here with you. We typically start at 6:30, but we've been a little more liberal during the course of the summer, and so thus is 6:55 ish. So, and so for those who are rocking with us live, great. Otherwise, I would suspect that it will remain up. And so, thank you again for being with us today. I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. It's just a little conversation. It's not meant to be extensive. Doesn't mean to be or want to be long and drawn out. Just some conversation that we hope will be stirring, encouraging. Hope that it pricks your consciousness, that it messes with your heart a little bit, and causes you to process and think about this thing that we call the gospel at a deeper level. Listen, 2 weeks ago, we launched the first of what we hope to be a series of conversations that we're calling Growing in Wild Times. Last week, we said that the symptom of America's greatest sin of slavery was the Imago Dei. Because it's only when you minimize, misconstrue, diminish, distort, and reduce a person's self-image can you justify the act of enslavement, Jim Crowism, segregation. When you do this, it's only then does your treatment seem fair and just. Dr. Sean Rochester, in his book, The Black Tax, The Cost of Being Black in America, takes a look at the impact of these symptoms from an economic standpoint. He takes a look at the impact of these systems and the impact that they have had on us systemically. But I surmise that these systems reflect an ideology and an ethos not just rooted in economics, but superiority, privilege. There's a movie that I just watched recently. Matter of fact, I just watched it last night called Burden. I think it's a few years old now, but it was based on a true story in a small town in South Carolina where this young upstart KKK, this young upstart Klansman, was given the keys to begin to lead the organization. And they took over this historic landmark theater that was known for segregation, and they turned it into a KKK museum where you can buy artifacts, demeaning artifacts, and different kind of articles. And sufficient to say, this young man ran into a young lady that he has started a relationship with, and as a consequence, she impacted his thinking, and he left the Klan organization. And as a consequence, it began to cost them their life. Their life became under heavy threat. And the very people that he was demeaning, the very people that he was dogging out, the particular pastor that he had actually been assigned to shoot to kill, was the very pastor that had taken him in. I don't want to get stuck on that. I can go a lot of different places on that, but sufficient to say, this Caucasian brother was poor, uneducated, unsophisticated, didn't have a lot of resources. The only thing that was driving him was his skin color. It was his skin color that made him think that he was better than someone else. He didn't have the education of this African American pastor. He didn't have the training or the sophistication or the stability of this African American pastor, but because of the color of his skin, he assumed a level of superiority and privilege. And so I'll say again, uh, uh, America's greatest sin of slavery was the Imago Dei, because it's only when you minimize, misconstrue, diminish, distort, and reduce a person's self-image can you justify enslavement, Jim Crowism, and segregation, and allow it to seem fair and just. And so much of what we are experiencing today is reflective and rooted in an ideology, not just in economics, but also superiority and privilege. I just said last week, and I'll say it again, you must admit, regardless of your religious perspective or your political persuasion, it's crazy out here. It's some wild times. In a cultural climate that is growing coarser, folks are being attacked by pathogens, people, and sometimes both. A polarizing POTUS, P-O-T-U-S, President of the United States, a polarizing POTUS, and a obstinate administration. It is some wild times when the POTUS posts on his Twitter chats of white power. It's a wild time. Marks or masks have been or become a symbol of politics. Trump and Pence say no to mask publicly because somehow it's a show of masculinity and bravado. Somehow it's a sign of weakness to wear a mask. And so now many of their loyal followers are refusing to wear them in public places, even when signs clearly say that they must. Daniel Maples was fired recently from Costco because he became enraged and went on a rant as he moved towards an elderly woman. I just need to go ahead and say this because there's truth to power, and it also presents us to begin to heal and to reconcile. But white rage, toxic masculinity, white male fragility, and Trumpism is a dangerous mix. We're still waiting on justice for Breonna and Elijah McClain. We're living in some wild times. A Fox commentator recently said Drew Brees, the quarterback of the Saints, has a right as a person to speak his mind. But 2 years ago, she told LeBron he ought to just shut up and dribble. We're living in some wild times. But I believe that the text, the Bible, is sufficient for the day to provide insight, clarity, and perhaps even strategy. But I want to talk to us this evening. I want to just take a look at what I believe may be contributing to the wild times that we're in. I want to take a look at what I believe is impacting some of the spaces that we find ourselves in. Listen, let me just say, I love the stories of the First Testament because there is power in stories. If you check out chapter 37 of Genesis, starting with verse 5, verse 9, verse 18, and verse 19, if you check that out, you'll see the results of the toxic mix of power and fragility. But I want to take a look at the Second Testament, not the New Testament. I just believe that none of God's revelation is old. And so at the gathering, we don't say Old Testament or New Testament. We simply say the First Testament and the Second Testament. I want to take a look at the Second Testament, and I want to take a look at the results of the toxic mix of power and fragility. I think the scripture highlights for us what happens when this toxic mix of power and fragility meet. Check out Acts chapter 6. Look at Acts chapter 6, verse 8. Just a summation. We're doing a drive-by tonight. Acts chapter 6, verse 8. Stephen, a man full of power, grace, did miracles, signs. But check out the response he got in verse 10, 11, and 13 for the signs and miracles that he did. Drop down to chapter 7, Stephen explains and defends his theology. But look at chapter 59, look at verse 59 and check out the results of his defense of his theology and his explanation of his position. We get to chapter 8. Saul, who later repented, was not only a witness, but complicit with what happened to Stephen in chapter 59. Stephen, a man considered a follower of the way, a man who was well versed in what he believed, attempted to present his case, and as a consequence of toxic masculinity and power, Stephen lost his life. Listen, let me just say this. If we're going to grow in these wild times, the church has to be honest about the relationship between her theology and her sociology. She is going to have to stop acting like there is and has been no relationship between her cultural expression and her concept of God. Let me say that again. Toxic masculinity and power is a dangerous mix. And if we're going to grow in these wild times, particularly as a Christian community, because that's who my audience predominantly is. It's a Christian audience, those who have ascribed to the message, the ministry, and the methodology of Jesus. If the church is going to grow in wild times, the church has to be honest about the relationship between her theology and her sociology. She is going to have to stop acting like there is and has been no relationship between her cultural expression and her concept of God. How did Jesus accidentally become Caucasian, blonde-haired, and blue-eyed? How did every single doggone disciple become Caucasian? The church has to be honest about the relationship between her theology and her sociology. The church is going to have to stop acting like there is no relationship between her cultural expression and her concept of God. The late Dr. James Cone, in his classic book, The God of the Oppressed, says theology is not a universal language. It is an interested language, and thus is always a reflection of the goals and aspirations of a particular people in a definite social setting. Niebuhr said there is no such thing as a disinterested theology. Rage, toxic masculinity, fragility, and power has not served the church well. Listen, if we're going to grow, our Caucasian brothers and sisters are going to have to concede that they socially constructed a concept of Christianity that has been inconsiderate, insensitive, injurious to not only black and brown people, but to the poor in general. I'm going to say that one more time, and you can message me and we can have a theological debate if you want to offer up a contrary opinion. But if we're going to grow as a Christian community, if the Christian narrative is going to carry the right kind of weight, our Caucasian brothers and sisters are going to have to concede that they socially constructed a concept of Christianity that has been inconsiderate, insensitive, and injurious not only to black and brown people, but to the poor. In the book, The late Dr. Kane Hope Felder, in his classic book, Stony the Road We Trod, African American Biblical Interpretation, he quotes a folklore that goes like this. A young boy was told about the many conquests of hunters over the lions. The story intrigued the little boy. So puzzled, he asked, if the lion is supposed to be the king of the jungle, why is it that the hunter always wins? The father responded in wisdom, the hunter will always win until the lion writes down his own story. Whew. The same may be said about African Americans who have been the victims of having their story told by somebody else. A young boy was told about the many conquests of hunters over lions. The story intrigued the little boy. Puzzled, he asked, if the lion is supposed to be the king of the jungle, why is it that the hunter always wins? And the father responded, the hunter will always win until the lion writes his own story. I want to suggest to you this evening, the same may be said about African Americans and others who have had their story altered by others. The same can be said about African Americans who have been the victims by having their story told by others. We do ourselves a service, a disservice, when we attempt to detach our religious expression from our culture. We do ourselves a disservice when we try to engage in lofty theological places and these ethereal kind of constructs that disconnect themselves from our everyday experience. The only way that Christianity could be manifested the way that it has been in America and even around the world is because it was attached to a narrative that was attached to a particular group of people for a particular purpose that suited their social needs, desires, and wants. And that particular narrative, as I said before, was harmful and injurious to other groups of people. If we don't begin to address the reality that our Christian narrative, our expression of faith is attached to our culture, that it is attached to our socialization, we're going to keep playing games. And Christianity is going to continue to operate ineffectively. It's going to continue to come up short in helping to impact change for eternity if we do not address the horrific ills that our faith has participated in. I know for some that sounds perhaps like a broken record. Perhaps this is a conversation that we should be moving on from. But until the lesson is learned, we got to stay right here until we get the lesson. Children of Israel spent 40 days marching around a piece of territory that probably should have took less than a month. 40 years, I'm sorry, that should have took less than a month. And so I want to say that same lesson applies to us. Until we learn a lesson, until we begin to address and to confront the ills of our faith, we'll continue to find ourselves in the same place. I am asking, I am begging, I am pleading with us as a Christian community to revisit the way in which we have constructed the Christian narrative. I'm begging us to reconsider how we've looked at it up to this point. It has been harmful and hurtful. Acts chapter 6, 7, and 8 is a demonstration, in my opinion, of what happens when rage, toxic masculinity, fragility, and power manifest themselves in a religious setting. When it does, people get hurt in the name of God. And so we have an opportunity to alter that, to correct that, to change that. Let's be that body of Christ that embraces change for a new day, so that those who are coming behind us won't have to deal with a theology, an ideology, a philosophy that is rooted in hate and the disregard of another group of people simply because. What a challenge we have before us, and what a great opportunity if we step into it the right way. Yo, I'm out. I just wanted to have some conversation. I am praying for you, and I hope that you are doing the same for me. Peace.